Hi everybody, welcome to the Peak Lapel and another episode of the Road to Mykonos. So today I'm going to do something a little different. There are lots and lots of videos of cars being driven around racetracks or country roads with views of their interior and exterior. But today I want to talk about the uglier side of supercar ownership and in particular the ownership of a classic supercar. So I am going to run through with you exactly what it has cost me to run a Ferrari F355 Spider for the last year. It's one of those cars that it's got all sorts of myths and rumours about it in terms of just how much it does cost to run, and so hopefully I may be able to answer and or debunk some of those rumours. So before we go any further, wristwatch check. This is Audemars Piguet Royal Oak chronograph in rose gold. So, firstly, why the 355? Really, it comes down to this. It was the Ferrari for me when I was growing up. When it came out, when I was about 10 years old, I absolutely loved it. It was just such a beautiful, elegant, simple design. I said to myself, when I am in the position to buy a classic Ferrari, that's the one I will go for. So, when I was fortunate enough to be in that position just over a year ago, I started to do my research. Initially, I wanted one in yellow, Giallo Fly, with black interior, and in GTS, and the GTS model, which is the hardtop Targa. Now, I actually changed my mind completely and ended up buying a Spider in Rosso Corsa with cream interior. Why? Because I did my research and it seemed like that was the one really that I should be going for, and that's the one I did, and I don't regret it. I love it. Every time I look at that car, I go anywhere near it, it genuinely makes me happy. So I definitely don't regret going for the version that I did, and believe it was definitely the right one for me. So the next question is, which one should you go for in terms of price and mileage? Now, there are lots of 355s on Piston Heads or Auto Trader, and they can range all the way from £60,000 through to 140, even more, £150,000. Why? Because it's very mileage dependent. I took the decision that I needed to have one that had done a few miles, but not too many. So if you've got one that's done 3,000 or 4,000 miles, then ultimately you could have issues with it because it's likely to have parts in there that were put into the car when it was actually manufactured, and these things are not going to last, having sat still for 20 years or more. So you might pay the premium for having a basically concourse ready car, but equally you're probably going to have to spend money on replacing an awful lot in order to have it as a driver, because that's the whole point of this for me. These cars are not to just sit in a glass case, they are to be enjoyed and driven. Equally, I could have bought one for £60,000 with 60,000 on the clock, as an example. But again, that made no sense to me either, because there's the potential for it to run into issues in terms of maintenance there as well. So I ended up going for one that had done just over 23,000 miles, and that cost just over £100,000. It was the sweet spot for me, and that was the decision that I made. On top of that, when I collected it, it having had a complete service as part of the purchase price, it also had to have the Capristo exhaust. Now, the 355 stock sounds great, but with a Capristo exhaust, for me, there's no other V8 that sounds like it. It has the F1 scream. It reminds me of what was the golden age of F1 for me, when I remember watching Senna drive, as an example. And then unfortunately, of course, he passed away in 1994. But then you have the era of Schumacher moving into Alonso, and then all the way through to the tail end of the 2000s, when we still had naturally aspirated engines, and they just sounded phenomenal, moving from V12s to V10s. That's what it sounds like to me. And I don't think that there's another car that competes with this in terms of noise, quality of noise. The 360 Challenge Stradale sounds pretty epic, and you may say I'm biased, and obviously you're entitled to your own opinion, but I think the 355, particularly with the Capristo exhaust, sounds pretty spectacular. So in terms of running costs then, you know what I paid for it, and the additional extras that I needed, the Capristo exhaust and the cover. The cover was about £200, so the Capristo exhaust about £4,000. Then you've got insurance. Insurance, bearing in mind, is fully comprehensive, and the car is kept in a secure underground car park. The insurance is about £900, which I didn't think was too bad, and it's certainly cheaper than a lot of other so-called supercars to insure. Road tax was £265. So really, other than servicing, therefore, the main expense you've got is petrol. Now, in the last 12 months, I've done just shy of 3,000 miles. Now, that's a lot, obviously, and it's probably a lot more than I had anticipated doing in it. But I think the combination of having it's a new car for me. We had such an amazing summer last year that put those two things together, plus the fact that I just absolutely love driving it. I was always going to do more miles than I expected. I'm not worried about it. It's not a car that I ever expect to sell. So if it has a few more miles on it, so what? At least I've used it and I've loved it. So that's the number of miles it's done, and I have spent about £1,500 in petrol. So again, you guys make up your own minds as to whether that's a lot. You're really looking at, I've spent around £130 a month on petrol, which on average is about 2 tanks. It's a relatively small tank, and obviously you're putting in premium. Obviously the petrol with the highest octane number, so it is a bit more expensive that way. But you're probably looking at around 2 tanks a month. Then the next big thing, obviously, is servicing and parts. So I explained the exhaust, I explained the car cover when I collected it. In October, it needed to have its MOT done. Now, obviously, that was all part of the service and have to pay for the MOT, but there were a couple of other things that needed to be done. Now, unfortunately, and I'm ashamed to say, but this is a warts and all video, I did manage to nick one of the wheels whilst parking it, and so that needed to be refurbished. Now, on a 355, they're magnesium wheels, and so they're a little bit more intricate to be done. It takes a little longer, and so that plus the labour, you're looking at around £180 to refurbish one of those wheels, which is obviously quite a lot. Then you've got the interior, which is cream. Now, it will mark. The blue, especially if you wear denim, it's going to rub off, and you need to make sure you stay on top of it so that the leather looks sharp. Which I had done, and that cost around £150, something like that. So all in all, that service was £360. I'll call it a service. This is just ongoing maintenance that needs to be done to ensure the car remains in top condition. But the main one really was the one that it's just had. Now, this service was your standard once a year service. It's not something it wasn't anything that screamed out to me saying it really needs to go to the specialist. But there were a couple of things that didn't take me by surprise, and others that the reason why you go to a specialist is to ensure that they not only service it properly, but they also make sure that they are proactive in looking at the car and trying to foresee what could go wrong in the near future, and preventing that from happening by replacing parts perhaps slightly before they need to be, but that's what's absolutely vital in ensuring that these cars remain in absolutely top condition. So this specialist charges a flat fee for the checking the car and the annual service in terms of labour. That's around £600. Now I had realised that there was an issue with the handbrake. It wasn't engaging and releasing as well as it should have done. So when they told me that was sticking, that was no surprise to me. And to replace that, the cable itself is only £50, but it's the labour that always cost the money, which was £190. Now, in cars like this, again, you're talking about classic Ferraris. They are made of tubular steel. The engine is mounted directly to it, so you need to keep an eye on this. And so they checked the engine mounts and they checked the gearbox mounts, and both needed to be replaced. The engine mounts, I say that the engine mounts needed to be replaced straight away. The gearbox mounts could have been left, but I took the decision that it's better to just do it. So the engine mounts, two of those were in total £137, with labour of £153. The gearbox mounts, now they were a little bit more expensive, and you're looking at around £350, including labour for those. So that was quite a bit. The oil cooler hoses needed to be replaced because they're weeping a little bit. Again, nothing major, but better to have it done straight away. The hoses themselves, for two, about £150. Once again, it's the labour, £270 for that. And lastly, some anti-corrosion treatment. Again, the tubular steel, you need to keep on top of these things to ensure that there aren't any rust issues in these cars. It's going to happen. You just have to keep on top of it, and you're never going to have a problem. And the treatment itself is relatively cheap again, £35, but it's the time, just under £300 for that. Lastly, something you have to just budget for, the front left fog light. Obviously it must have hit a rather large stone whilst driving, and it had totally smashed the light. So that was £300 for the fog light. So really you get an idea. There was nothing there that I was totally shocked about. I always knew that there was the potential for an issue, for example, with the mounts. It's just a case of when, not if. So as long as you have that in your own mind, then really with these cars, you're not actually going to have too much of a scare. Now, when I bought the car, I had, having done my research and spoken to lots of different people and spoken to the specialist, they said to budget around £2,000 to £2,500 a year for your service. So on that basis, I think that we are there or thereabouts. Okay, we're a little bit more, but bearing in mind there are a few things that perhaps didn't need to be done right now, and of course things like the licking of the wheel, that's my own fault, so I can't do anything about that. So yes, it's a little bit higher, but actually, taking everything into consideration, that is pretty much what it's cost. So all in all, for the year, for the 12 months, insurance, call it £1,000. Your petrol, call it £1,500. Plus your road tax, call it £300. So £2,800 for those three things. Plus you're looking at another £3,000 for your service. So all in all, about £6,000 to run the car for the year. Now you guys make up your own mind as to whether you think that that's good value or not. For me, I've loved absolutely every second of it, and in my mind, no doubt whatsoever, worth every single penny. Now I should just touch on one subject before I go, and that's the issue of the engine out service. Now, it's not something that had to be done this year. It's another 2 years until it will need to be done. But that's important because it allows the specialist to check, not only replace the cam belt, but also check the subframe and ensure there are no issues there. And that should cost around £2,000 to £2,500. There are lots of stories about it costing £5,000 or £10,000, and it's just total rubbish. So there we are. I hope that was useful, and I hope that's given some real useful information about what it really costs to run one of these cars. No, it's not cheap, but it was never going to be cheap. This is a supercar from a previous era where the technological advances were nowhere near what they are today. But if you take all of that into account, and on top of that, the just how great it is to drive and how special it makes you feel when you're doing so, as I said, I think it's absolutely worth every penny. So there we are, guys. Thanks ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. Please like, subscribe, and tell your friends about the Peak Lapel. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. So until next time, take care of yourselves.